Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway.
And me, Gayatri.
We don't want to fight the bear, but by jingo if we do. We've got the men, we've got the ships, we've got the money too. That 19th century music hall ditty was a favourite of the late and great Anthony Wedgwood Benn. It could have been applied to the speech made by his son, Hilary Benn, bringing to a close the fateful debate in Parliament this week, which has taken Britain to war again. To discuss it here on board the Sputnik, we have Britain's foremost, by a country mile in fact, conservative political writer and analyst Peter Oborne. And I'm glad to say we can talk now, Peter, in the first instance, about the debate. It's often said, it's a cliche, that such occasions show the House of Commons at its best. Actually, I thought it showed the House of Commons at its worst this week. What did you think?
I completely agree with you. The one person who made a serious contribution, I felt, or the most, it was Jeremy Corbyn, but he was treated very badly by the House.
And not protected by the Speaker.
And not protected by the Speaker, who, I mean, a number of things have been said about the Speaker of the Commons, who ought to represent impartiality. Okay. What he did this week was to protect the war party in the House, because at the end of Hilary Benn's meretricious speech, the House started clapping, which I think, and the Speaker stopped the SNP from clapping speeches, but he tolerated clapping of Hilary Benn. And that clapping, of course, sent out the message that the Tory party and the New Labour faction had come together to vote for airstrikes on Syria.
The wars always start out with the tossing of straw hats and flag waving and cheers, but it seldom lasts long. The First World War, we were told, was going to be over by Christmas, but 4 Christmases hence, it was still producing blood and gore in oceanic quantity. This will not have the same oceanic quantity, but a lot of blood will now be spilt. And to what effect?
Well, that is what the Prime Minister, in my view, was unable to explain. He doesn't really have a war plan. He doesn't. It's really a case of bombing and hoping for the best. And that isn't really good enough, because I think that waging war is a very serious thing indeed. It causes deaths, it causes casualties, it causes innocent casualties, and it is a serious matter. And what I disliked about the debate last week was the way it was clearly being used for a domestic political purpose. That is to say that it was carefully structured to split the Labour Party, and the utterly disreputable remarks by the Prime Minister that terrorist sympathisers were going to go into the no lobbies, going to vote against the...
Which he refused to withdraw.
Which he refused to withdraw. That was using a matter of as serious as war in order to score cheap domestic political points.
You're a history man. You'll know, as I don't, who said this, but it seems to me an axiom in war that you work out what your enemy wants you to do and you do something different. In this case, there is no doubt at all, indeed it's on social media now, I saw a very powerful meme on social media emanating from these ISIS types last night, which was a recreation of the Crusader army of the Franks and the English, that they're coming back together again to launch another assault on the Muslim world. ISIS and Al-Qaeda and people like them, they really wanted us to vote for war yesterday, because they want to draw us in to a conflict because these people are ready to die, they have no fear of dying, but which will, in the longer term, bring the Muslims to their banner.
I think that is true. There's no question. If you look at the mad eschatology of ISIS, that they have this notion that they want to have the war to end all wars. We are, as far as ISIS are concerned, we are entering the end times now. And I think most of the people who are fighting in that war in Syria, by the way, all believe that we are entering the end times. We're going to see the return of the Mahdi and all kinds, and the war to end all wars. But and so you can say that. On the other hand, let's say something else. We do need to confront ISIS.
Sure.
I mean, they are an
question
evil...
is how, not if.
Yes.
We have to confront them in a way that defeats them, not in a way that strengthens them. Mm-hmm. And adding 7 or 8 tornadoes to the mix isn't going to end them. It's going to recruit for them. I'm absolutely sure that as we sit here this weekend, there are people in England who are plotting to harm us. They're not being directed from Raqqa. They will use weapons that didn't come from Raqqa. It's the idea that comes from Raqqa. And I wonder if this war's popularity, insofar as it has any, about 50-50 they say in the polls, will survive the first terrorist atrocity, an act of mass murder against innocent people, seeking to punish guilty people, just like 7/7.
Yeah, against that, I would say that the thought of a domestic atrocity, which, as you say, is perfectly conceivable, should not put us off waging war or any kind of foreign policy.
No, of course.
It shouldn't do that. No. But nevertheless, I do agree that I heard the Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond immediately after the vote saying this is making Britain safer.
Yeah.
I don't think that is, in the short term, that's certainly not true. And in the long term, we have to make sure that Daesh is confronted and destroyed. I mean, it is a absolutely poisonous group, as, by the way, the Russians have understood much better than the West.
Indeed, let's come on to that. I started with the Jingo quote precisely for that, because that was about a confrontation in which Britain, on the side of Turkey, was confronting Russia on its thrust towards Constantinople, now Istanbul. Remarkable historical echo. That's exactly where we are now, isn't it? We are in alliance with Turkey and with the United States and France against Russia. And this scarcely figured in the debate yesterday, because whilst it's abundantly clear the Western powers are bent upon regime change in Damascus, it didn't seem to occur to them that Russia and Iran are as implacably opposed. And therefore a confrontation in Syria, over Syria, is next to inevitable.
Well, the Syria civil war, which is the most unspeakable tragedy. I've been to Syria several times during this conflict, and it makes you want to cry and cry and cry. This wonderful country, beautiful country, center of civilization, being destroyed. I walked through a suburb of Damascus 2 months ago. It was e-scooter. You couldn't hear anything. You couldn't even hear birdsong. Nothing. There was no life in it at all. A place where people had lived and thrived only 2 years before. Now what is the, and if you look at what is causing the war, there are so many. There's the Saudi versus Iranian conflict. ISIS and Al-Qaeda will certainly see it as a Shia-Sunni conflict. And I think too many people in Britain see it as a Western versus Russian conflict. And it's clear to me that it is that we all parties have to come together to eradicate ISIS. If we go on fighting our proxy wars in Syria, then that is how ISIS survives, because people use them, as you rightly suggest. It looks very much like the Turks have used them. It looks very much like the Saudis have used them in some way. So people looks very much like we have used. Some will say we've used them in order to do down Assad. So there are all these agendas going on, and that was not. I didn't hear that point being made very clearly.
The confrontation with Russia, not just because we're on RT, but because I think the world might depend on it, the confrontation with Russia that will now follow is the most important thing for me, much as I love Syria. I don't want to see war between Russia and the West. But we saw with the shooting down of the Russian fighter by Turkey, just how quickly and how easily that could happen. What are your worries on that score?
Well, exactly the same as yours. My view is that Russia understood the nature of the real nature of the problem in Syria much sooner than Britain, Cameron, Obama, although I think Obama's been more intelligent than some say. I mean, the threat, Assad warned from the very beginning of the conflict that the threat came from militant, jihadi, nihilist, Wahhabi fighters. And it was a real, and we continued to see it long after it wasn't even conceivably true as a battle between freedom-loving Hampstead socialists and a brutal dictatorial autocratic regime in Damascus. That was a great folly by Britain and America and the West, because the Russians saw it in a much more realistic way, that here is militant jihad trying to take Damascus. Once it's taken Damascus, the message that sends out around the world. And Russia saw that. And Lavrov, by the way, has been the extraordinarily impressive figure.
Lavrov is the most impressive statesman and diplomat of my lifetime. There's more of this after the break. Welcome back to Sputnik, orbiting the world, and in particular the Middle East, but actually, as we're now into something of a global confrontation, genuinely looking at the world with Peter Oborne, a conservative, small c, probably also big C, though I don't inquire as to which card is in his wallet, but a man of the world, a man of history, by far and away the most acute observer of international affairs on the right in Britain today. And Peter, we ended the first half talking about Lavrov and the confrontation that may now lie before us over Syria, quite frightening times. I'm bound to say, if you are a conservative with a big C, that Hammond, compared to Lavrov, I mean, they said of Addington after he succeeded Pitt, that Pitt is to Addington as London is to Paddington. It seems to me that Hammond to Lavrov isn't much of a competition. Simon Jenkins, another conservative columnist in the newspapers this week, described Cameron as terrorism's useful idiot. I suppose what I'm getting at is that at this perilous time, we're not actually being led by men of great stature.
Yes, I accept that Hammond, Philip Hammond, the Foreign Secretary, is...
I'd forgotten his first name.
Yeah, he is not a significant figure. He is essentially a manifestation of George Osborne. He has not yet to say anything which has given me the impression he knows what he's talking about when it comes to foreign policy or the world. He's a useful machine politician.
The state of the Conservative Party is something to which I'd like to turn. You're an equally acute observer of that. We'll come to the Labour Party too in a minute. The Conservative Party, having, from my point of view, failed in its central objective after 6 years now of austerity, mired in scandal, the scandal that led to the suicide of a young man, would, in ordinary, and with Cameron having pre-announced that he was going, would, in other circumstances, be spiralling downwards, be in a bit of trouble, serious trouble. Is this war a useful diversion for them from that?
I don't think you can make that thesis sustainable, because Cameron is so dominant. I mean, owing to the weakness of Labour at the moment, the fact that Labour is fighting a civil war, the Conservatives have just won a general election. It's not like a desperate attempt by Kaiser Wilhelm in 1914. He launches World War I really to maintain his domestic standing. I don't think so. I think Cameron genuinely believes in this and he's convinced that he's doing the right thing. But let's go back to the Conservative Party, which I do agree with you is in a very interesting state of crisis. And by the way, it's the same state of crisis that Labour is in. And it's worth explaining. Both parties were captured by modernisers. The Blairites captured the Labour Party. They immediately reprogrammed it. They destroyed the power of the traditional institutions, the NEC. They turned the Labour Party into an instrument of neoliberalism and neoconservatism. This was a brilliant operation by Blair and Mandelson, and what happened with Corbyn is it's been recaptured by the Labour base. Very interesting. Now let's turn to the Conservative Party, where something very similar is going on. The Conservative Party was captured by the modernising faction, who modelled themselves on Blair. They hero worship Blair, yeah. And they did exactly the same thing organisationally, structurally, methodologically. That is to say, they deprogrammed the Conservative Party. Traditionally, the Conservative Party has had a major figure, a really substantial, a Chris Patten, a Thornycroft, a Willie Whitelaw, a Rab Butler, a really significant major figure at the top. They got rid of the political figures from the top and they put in the money man, the crony, Cameron's tennis partner, a non-entity, Feldman, in charge of the Conservative Party, accountable only to Cameron and Osborne, nobody else. And that he's incapable, he's got no political skills, he's not allowed on the television even. Imagine that, the representative of the Conservative base is not even permitted to go on Newsnight or the Today programme. He's just a manifestation of the leadership, of the capture of the party by the hedge fund managers, actually. And he's very interesting, this latest filthy, disgusting, tragic set of events happening at the heart of the Conservative Party is not because he knew it was going on, but because he didn't have the skills or the ability or the wisdom to act and react to it.
And who, therefore, be the beneficiary of this? Who's the Corbyn, then, in the Conservative Party?
Very interesting.
Who will lead a campaign to make it Conservative again?
Well, it's one point is that Corbyn came from within. In the Conservative, the revolt came from outside, UKIP. Farage grabbed millions of Conservative voters, but he did it from outside. Now, nevertheless, I think we must be on the edge of a popular revolt from within the constituency associations and the activists, because let's see how Feldman has done, the so-called chairman, well, he is the chairman of the party. He's turned it into a pro-EU campaigning machine. He's going out there ringing up his big donors and asking them to contribute to the Remain campaign. He and Mandelson and the New Labour mob, and Will Straw, the son of the Foreign Secretary, they're all together in this centre.
We're all in this together. Let's turn to Jeremy Corbyn. I saw him in that Victorian painting of the stag at bay in the House this week. He was noble. He was trying to make a sincere and, I believe, powerful, fundamentally powerful set of points. He was torn down by the yapping hounds. I'm not sure that he survives this.
If this is his last moment, what a glorious way to go. What Corbyn did was perform the traditional role of a leader of an opposition, utterly honourable, hold government policy to account. And the reaction to that by the rest of the House, by the media, and above all by his colleagues, was to ignore him, to humiliate him. But what a magnificent way to go if he does go. And I think there's still a fight on his hands, because he does have the support, as far as I can tell, of Labour Party members.
I want to turn to the question of Europe, if I may, on which you very frequently write. Someone like me, for example, an internationalist, the very opposite of a xenophobe and a racist, a bigot, which a lot of the UKIP individuals seem to me to be, will find myself almost certainly in the same lobby. I believe in Europe, I believe in the unity of its people, but I can't support this EU. I cannot campaign for it, I cannot try to persuade people to vote for it, and given that it's also under attack from a different political perspective, I'm not sure that the centre ground, the political class, can actually hold. And it may be that they are headed for defeat on the European Union.
Well, let's look at the... I'd like to think that. I probably will be part of the no camp. I'm respectfully waiting for the Prime Minister to return from his negotiations. And if he does secure Britain's democracy, I think this is what, to me, what is at stake is British democracy. The European Union, the central criticism for me is that the European Union is an anti-democratic body. And we want to... I think you do to be something maybe we're united on. British parliamentary democracy is a great thing, and our sovereignty is something which you can't. Europe is run by bureaucrats who themselves are controlled very often by large corporations and unseen.
Revolving door.
And they're invisible.
Invisible.
Nobody knows who they are. They get paid huge sums.
And that is the campaigning. Perhaps we will be on a...
I'd be delighted to be on a platform with you. The problem is some of the others. As Wellington said, reviewing his own troops before Waterloo, I don't know what they do to the enemy, but they don't have frightened me. But you and I, and maybe Hitchens could form a travelling show that might draw in the crowds. I just don't see... You see, when an institution, when there's no love for an institution, and nobody loves the European Union. Nobody, even the people.
It does have. It has the MEPs, the bureaucrats,
the people picking up the money,
the big companies which create the legislation because they station their lobbyists.
They love it
in Brussels, and they create the directive.
They love the lookup.
Yep.
But when I fought the first referendum in 1975, I was against joining it. There were quite a lot of people who loved it. The idea of Europe, of the European Union, no more war, and you could see the intellectual basis of that set of beliefs. But as it's turned out into this bloated, anti-democratic, untransparent, invisible, really quite malignant force.
Also an instrument of destruction.
In Greece?
If you're a Greek
Portugal.
or a Portugal, an instrument of social and industrial destruction, a wealth destruction, a jobs-destroying machine. That is what Europe has become.
Yeah. I'm not sure they're going to be able to hold the line. I'm not sure, of course it will be the big fear campaign,
They will use,
and that will have an effect. But I'm not sure that it's going to be decisive. Finally then, you're as well as being a Renaissance man, intellectual, and all that, you're a practicing journalist. I must say that the broadcast media, in particular, the BBC, starting from the Iraq War, 2003, and the Murdoch-owned Sky News empire, which drives so much newspaper coverage after the broadcasters have spoken, share a lot of responsibility for the international situation that we are now in.
I will end up by defending the BBC because it is, at its best, it's something which we all have in common. It's part of our common culture. It should not be owned or possessed by the political class. And recent figures at the helm of the BBC have, of course, been much too close. They've forgotten their great Arethian inheritance and become instruments of political interests, which they mustn't be. What would we be without the BBC? It would go over to, and that's why Murdoch, who you are critical of, wants to destroy the BBC so that we can have US-style TV. Do we want that?
No, but if we end up with a BBC that is indistinguishable from what Murdoch would like the TV to be, I mean, some of the people, we don't have time to go into it, who have been elevated to the top of the BBC, are in fact political apparatchiks.
Indeed.
Of this merged political class that you spoke about earlier. It's been absolutely fascinating, I must say. Peter Oborne, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very
on the
much.
Sputnik.
And lovely to talk to you.
And now it's your turn to tell us what you think through the portals of social media. What's rattling, Gayatri?
Well, the Daily Mail headline the morning after the vote was, "After the bombs, what's next?" Ricardo Picasso says, "Much humility, apology, and an admission that we are wrong. Or just more war because it's easier." And Bobby Sixkiller says, "Regime change, they have already said so. Turn it into another Libya."
Yes, another Libya, another Iraq. They ended well, didn't they?
They did. And that's all that we've got for today.
Which, alas, means that's the end of a terrific show. I hope you'll agree.
You can stay in touch with us on Twitter at @RT_Sputnik or on Facebook, Sputnik on Russia Today. It's goodbye from me, Gayatri.
And from me, George Galloway. It's been marvellous.